Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, we're going back into the Lord of the Rings series. We're going to one of the oldie but goodies that I had to give a second chance in 2022. So in our retrospective of all the Lord of the Rings games, we went through a ton of them. One of them we talked about was from Pandemic Studios, responsible for games like Mercenaries, Destroy All Humans, Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, among many others. And they were also responsible for Lord of the Rings Conquest. So what I did in preparation for that video was chose one game out of the stack of Lord of the Rings games that I wanted to do a deep dive on, whether it be giving the game a second chance or playing it for the first time. Now I gotta keep it real with you all. Transparency is key. If I could have really had the honest selection here, I would have picked Lord of the Rings: The Third Age. Just as many of you know, over on the Mr. Matty channel, review season is heating up, and I don't want to overcommit on RPGs when I'm already playing a couple of JRPGs for this channel. So I made the selection I think would be fair, where I could take a deep dive but not sink, 20, 30, 40, 50 hours into a game. And I went with Lord of the Rings Conquest, especially because I haven't played this game since probably the mid-2010s was the last time I revisited it. So I thought, it'd be a great experiment to dive into this game here and see if it's aged as well as I think it has. So for those who don't know, Lord of the Rings Conquest is, in an elevator pitch as I put it in my Lord of the Rings retrospective, Star Wars Battlefront, but Lord of the Rings. That's an easy sales pitch for me. I'm all in once I hear that. So we're going to learn more about it in this video, and if it aged well, should you dive in yourself. With that, if you're new here, consider subscribing if you like nostalgia and retrospective content. Let's get started with the back of the box in our complete in-box tradition. Save Middle-earth or destroy it. Choose your side in the War of the Ring. Fight through all the battles from the films and fight through an all-new story in the Evil campaign. Play how you want. Wield a sword, shoot a bow, use stealth, or conjure magic. Take control of trolls, Oliphants, horses, catapults, heroes, and villains. The choice is yours. Epic online battles featuring 16-player clashes in a wide variety of modes and 2-player split-screen action, something that Halo Infinite may not be familiar with, by the way, but I digress. All right, cracking it open, we have the most crumpled manual of all time. I'm sorry, this is just a disgrace. I'm usually better than this. I don't know what happened to this, but when it came in the mail, it looked like someone used this as like a boxing bag or something. Someone was angry when they had this manual, but it's okay because at the end of the day, it's not really anything special. I'd be more upset if there was a lot of art in here, but it's a thin manual. We got to find a term for types of manuals, right? I always call the big ones thick boys, but what do we call a really skinny manual that has, just font, just text, no real screenshots outside of one here, just kind of walks you through it. A lazy manual. We got to find a term for it, so sound off down below. The winner gets absolutely nothing, I'll be honest with you. But anyway, it walks you through hints and tips for all the various classes in the game, all 4 of them. It talks about the heroes that you can play as, and it also talks about the online mode. But otherwise, a pretty thin manual. It was getting to be that point in time because this game did come out in 2009, so it was getting on in the age of manuals not being a must-have in the box. Anyway, it's time to talk about Lord of the Rings Conquest and why I think it kind of has aged pretty well, if you're willing to be a little flexible with it. Okay, so let me start off by giving a little bit of my personal history when it came to Lord of the Rings Conquest. I spent an ungodly amount of time on this game's online mode. I put tons and tons of hours into online play. I would do team deathmatch, capture the ring, conquest, and I would just grind it online with my friend in 6th grade, and it was so much fun. Especially the rogue class in particular was really broken. But I also remember using the mage class because there was cool chemistry between all of the classes in this game. So the mage had like a defensive ability where you could hold up your staff and it would create an orb around you that would protect you from all projectiles. So if someone wanted to stealth kill you, they'd have to get up really close. And so you'd have like warriors nearby. It encouraged a sense of team play that I will admit I don't think Star Wars Battlefront had. Star Wars Battlefront, you could pick the assault trooper, the rocket trooper, you could pick the sharpshooter. It kind of didn't matter. You were always a one-man army. The change in design philosophy, I think, works in Lord of the Rings Conquest's favor, where it goes, hey, what if you all work together like an actual army? When you combine that with in a movie series for me. I know many people have read the books, but for me, I only have watched the movies. Seeing all the epic battles on screen and truly being able to live them, I just feel like that connection makes as much sense as it did with Star Wars Battlefront, right? With Star Wars, I remember growing up with the franchise, seeing all these epic battles with clone troopers, and I always wanted to be a clone trooper. And so that game, being Star Wars Battlefront, let me realize that childhood dream. And then Lord of the Rings Conquest, same thing. You see the scene with Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers. You're like, man, that was epic. Like the build up to it, the execution, the music, so fantastic. I want to have a battle like that, you know, because we had our movie tie-in games at that point in time. You got to live out those scenes, play as the main characters you had already seen on the big screen. But what about the boots on the ground soldier? How did they factor into this? What was their mission? This game tackles that in a story mode for both the good and evil side. As I covered in my Lord of the Rings retrospective, this is something that EA was really exploring a lot in their games, whether it be Lord of the Rings Tactics, whether it be Lord of the Rings The Third Age, or of course Conquest. You could play as the heroes or villains. I think the most organic interpretation of it was definitely Lord of the Rings Conquest, because of course you want to play as both sides. You can play as, of course, Sauron, you can play as Gandalf, you know, whoever you want. The problem though is this game feels a little more condensed speaking about it compared to something like Battlefront. That's one thing I noticed going back to it, was it was really nice to be back, but when Battlefront has 6-ish classes, if we're talking about Battlefront 2, plus all its heroes and villains, and of course, with those heroes and villains came their own move sets. Some of them did overlap, but I didn't think many did. Whereas Lord of the Rings Conquest, immediately the melee animations between, say, Gandalf and a standard mage are relatively similar. Some of the ability movesets are similar compared to other characters, and it makes it difficult to differentiate between everyone outside of going, oh, I'm playing as Gandalf, or oh, I'm playing as Sauron, and so on and so forth. That is important to note, but there is a it factor to this game of just being able to live out these battles as the music's blaring and you're going on your killing spree, which isn't as easy as Battlefront, where you could just mow down 30 people and it says, do you want to play as a hero? And I go, always, because I always am the hero or villain. However, in this game, because they have a combo system, because every class is particularly good at something, it's very difficult to go on a rampage. And I specifically remember that online, which is why the rogue was pretty broken. But when you play as, say, the warrior has a combo system that has a light attack, a heavy attack, a smash attack. You have abilities you can chain into it, so you could come in with like fire on your blade and do sort of a uppercut, and then do a spinning attack when you hold, I think it's L1 and triangle, and then you can land a combo after that. If you are good at this game, and especially this factored into online play, you could really stun lock your opponents and hold them down big time. And then if, say, your mage friend came in and hit with like an AoE spell and wiped out people near them, it was epic. There was some really cool, oh my gosh, moments that were dynamic. They were organic. They were just happening all over the map. And it's why this game is fantastic, but it's also why it's hard to recognize that nowadays when you're playing in single player. That's not to say that it's bad in single player, but the AI is relatively one track. It's not going to push you into any experimentation. You're sort of going to go into your lane and do specifically what your role calls you to do. If you're going to do, say, the rogue, you're not going to engage in hand-to-hand combat. But in online, if you had, say, a mage teaming up with you saying, I got you, I'm going to protect you, because mages have a healing spell as well as assault spells, then it changes it a little bit. So unfortunately, not having online play, I do think hurts this game. But let's talk about what you can experience. So there is instant action like in Battlefront. You can play a number of maps throughout the game. There's over 10 of them. And there's 3 modes. There's Conquest, there's Team Deathmatch, and then there's Capture the Ring. Capture the Ring could have been pretty good, I think, if they actually made it make sense. For example, I will capture the ring and bring it to their base to score a point. And as you get closer to their base, there will be more enemies because they'll be spawning there. The spawns won't change. And so actually scoring points, these matches, if you don't have a time limit on them, can go on forever. And it creates some really odd grudge matches. Even in, say, a easy difficulty AI match, it can really drag on. But where this game flourishes, I think, is in Conquest. Everyone's moving around the map, capturing command posts, everyone's battling, spawns are flipping and changing. It's there and in Team Deathmatch, where it's all out war, that I think this game truly shines. But being able to hop around maps and modes is, of course, a huge benefit to this game. But perhaps the biggest benefit of them all is the story mode. Being able to truly live out those big battles you see in the films, its own battles. I mean, I just love being there. It gives you a new spin on the movies you've already seen, just like Star Wars Battlefront did. But what I also adore is the evil campaign. You know, we've seen evil mode in things like Lord of the Rings: The Third Age over on Game Boy Advance. You could play as the evil side. You could play evil mode in Third Age over on GameCube. It was a mini game, but you could never truly feel like you were being the villain, going on their own rampage. And what happens if they truly win it all? Because we've already seen the same story over and over and over. So it was very refreshing to go into the evil mode and watch how it all unfolds. So it's very different in that regard. And that's sort of the package offering, right? It's the campaign, the instant action, and they do lean heavily into the online play. For me, though, what I leaned into growing up was 100% going to be the achievements and trophies. What's really odd is when I was playing this game, and I swear on my life, I popped almost every trophy on the PS3, but when I was playing it for capture and gameplay, I was getting some trophies, and I checked, am I signed in on my PSN? Because me and my brother used to share the PS3. I was like, maybe I'm in on his account here. No, I was on mine, and I was very confused by that, but I was happy to see it because this was the first ever game that I double dipped in. So what I mean by that is when I started to get my achievement and trophy addiction that I think all of us have suffered from at one point or another, this was the game that started it for me. I loved it on PS3. I played it endlessly, dumped dozens of hours into it, if not hundreds. I wish there were play clocks around back then because this is one of those games I would love to have known how much I put into it as a kid. But anyway, you know, you sink all those hours into it, you get all those trophies, the metagame's over. It's like, okay, now what? Well, what did I do? I turned this in and I picked up a copy for the 360. And I know I have most of the achievements there, at least 43 out of 50. But when I was playing this, I was getting the trophies and I started to feel that itch come back. It's like, come on, Matt, you got some work left to do. Maybe get that platinum finally. But unfortunately, there are some online trophies and achievements, so I kind of gave up on that. But it was interesting to see it pop because it did bring me back to a certain time period. I don't really hunt trophies or achievements as much as I would like to nowadays. It's not even a time commitment thing. I play video games a lot. I make sure I set out at least 3 to 6 hours a day, which may sound extreme, but I stay up pretty late. So, you know, like I'll end my day at 3 a.m. So you can do the math on that of when I actually do start gaming and when I stop working. That's the cycle I work within. It is not the best one. I'm working to get better with it. But anyway, I put a lot of time in the game, so it's not really a time thing for me. It's more so that some platinums and achievements are just not really alluring to go and grab. This was in a day and age where I thought they were really fun to get. But nowadays, I think platinums oftentimes are pretty easy checklists. And then you'll have like this 1 or 2, maybe 3 trophies that ask you to play the game over with no equipment and do this like absurd challenge that I'm just like, what are y'all thinking? Like, this isn't a fun achievement list. Like, there are ways to do it that make it really enjoyable and experimental in your playthrough. But Lord of the Rings Conquest was the start of that. That's a long way of putting that all out there. And so when I dove back into it, I gotta say the actual classes did let me down a little bit because I do wish there were more. But the capturing of that era, it almost feels like it's been preserved here, truly, well and truly. Beyond the movie games, it feels like this was a game really made in a time capsule. I don't know if we'll ever see anything quite like it because the Lord of the Rings heyday is sort of passed us by now, and we're seeing them try again. This is why we're making these Lord of the Rings videos with Rings of Power. And I know there's stuff that's now, it's big enough to experiment where we're not going to see something like this. We're going to see something more along the lines of Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor. We might see some ports of older games come back around. And I just appreciate it for that because it's not even an expensive game anymore. And Pandemic was a team that had fun at the heart of all their video games. Mercenaries, Destroy All Humans, Star Wars Battlefront. The fact that they released all these games as well as The Saboteur in about a 4 to 5 year window is insane. I've actually had the privilege to sit down and interview some of the higher ups that were formerly at Pandemic. I have a podcast episode of it over on my Mr. Matty YouTube channel. It was originally supposed to be a documentary, but unfortunately some files fell through that I had with one of them in particular was the founder of the company. I was Trust me, I don't get mad easily, but I was mad when I somehow lost that file. So between that and not being able to get more interviews for the show, I just decided to throw it together into a podcast episode. But if anyone's ever curious on some of the ins and outs, you can watch that, because I had a lot of fun at least doing some research on it. And when I talked to them, their theory was that they grew too fast, and that's why they're not in business anymore. It's a shame, because I feel like their style of game is sorely missed in today's industry. And we are seeing THQ Nordic sort of carry the mantle by remaking Destroy All Humans 1 and 2. But I do genuinely wish that Pandemic were still around, because they made fantastic games like this. And who knows, think of like Game of Thrones, now how popular that is. If Pandemic were still around, they could have totally made this style of game for Game of Thrones. You had the heroes on one side, you had the villains on one side, you had the battles that you'd see in the show. It writes itself. So again, a time capsule style game that I still do recommend. Just know the camera, the combat, it can get a little janky. Doesn't feel as refined as it once did, as we once tolerated, but I dig this game a lot still, although in some instances time has not been favorable to it. But I'm curious what you think of Lord of the Rings Conquest, so please do fire away. And with that, that's all I have to say in this video, so take excellent care of yourselves.